Hi, this is Jason Bradford.
I'm Asher Miller.
And I'm Rob Dietz. Welcome to Crazy Town, where Black Friday meets the Black Death. This episode was originally recorded on December 18th, 2019, before we knew much about the coronavirus outbreak.
All right, guys, you know how here at Post Carbon Institute, we've been talking about the fact that, hey, fossil fuels aren't going to last forever, and the climate's got some issues. We may not want to burn so much of them.
Yeah, just a little.
So it makes me think like maybe, I'm just possibly someday we're going to have to use less of them, right?
No.
Okay, well, just stick with me, okay? Thought experiment.
Just as a theoretical.
Yeah, now.
Okay.
So one policy change that could help us is to actually reduce the speed limit. That would save a lot of fuel. What do you think about that idea?
I remember that was real popular back when I was a kid. The national speed limit was 55, right?
Yeah, great songs
So
about
that's what
that.
you're talking about, right? We would like speed limit instead of 65 on the freeway, on the highway, you would go back down to 55?
Well,
you
yeah,
wimp. You're a wimp. You
Sammy
don't-
Hagar couldn't do it. I mean, the second best lead singer of Van Halen
Right.
could not handle a 55
You know,
mile. He
gonna-
can't drive 55.
We're going to get a lot of people who are going to take offense by that.
Now, 55 is a wimpy speed limit. You could go way lower than that.
I thought you meant you
45?
could go way faster.
No. Okay.
45.
No.
45 is
lower than that.
insane.
You should go lower.
What?
30. I recommend 35.
35 miles per hour.
Yes, because that would match the speed limit that was imposed by the U.S. government during World War II.
Well, cars probably couldn't even go that fast back then. It's probably a lot easier. Meanwhile, Rob on his electric bike can go 35
Yeah, they're
miles per hour.
stopping.
28.
They're stopping cyclists going downhill at like 40 miles an hour.
You're going too fast.
Yeah.
Are you kidding? They lowered it to 35
To
miles per hour?
35, which was a blessing because gas was rationed. And if you weren't some special person that like was a long distance trucker or something like that, if you're just a regular person with it, you got the A sticker, which entitled you to 3 or 4 gallons a week of fuel.
Wow. So, I mean, you got to go back then, though. I mean, there wasn't even a federal highway system. So, I mean, when was there ever a need to go more than 35? It must have been really just lovely. Visiting grandma, take you 6 hours
obviously
to get
there was a need if they felt like they had to set a limit. But
Set a limit.
Wait, so you only had like 3 or 4 gallons a week?
A week, right.
Wow.
Yeah. Well, so, and what were fuel economy, 20 miles a gallon or whatever like that?
Oh,
So
yeah, who knows? But that's like inconceivable to imagine. Can you imagine if we had a president stand up there and say, well, guess what, guys? 35 miles per hour. That's all you can do.
Right.
Oh, and by the way, you can only use like 3 gallons a week.
Right. We would be our behavior would change so fast though, right?
That'd be awesome. Like the Teslas, which they wouldn't care about the gas ration, but they would have to put a governor on that thing. You know, so it could go 0 to 35 in negative time. It's gonna have to really be cut down.
But of course, fuel wasn't the only thing rationed. They rationed all kinds of stuff in World War II. It was incredible. And this was not just the U.S., all the world. There's probably different countries
Like
rationing.
what?
Well, the main things that were first rationed actually were tires. Rubber was in short supply. But food of all kinds was rationed. And not just like gasoline, but fuel oil. So burning like heavy oil to heat homes and things like that.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Okay.
That was rationed. And
So, wait, on the food front, was it specifics or was it calories or how?
well, they phased in different products over time, but it ended up being like almost the grocery
Is that
basket
because
of
they were
stuff.
running low on all that stuff for
Well,
the war
they
effort?
wanted to make sure things were diverted, but there was all these funny things where like dog food was no longer allowed to be manufactured in cans; it had to be in dried, and because tin was in
'Cause
short
tin was-
supply.
right. Well, people were recycling all that stuff.
All that there was salvage boards,
Yeah.
and then they really wanted you to save any fat that was left over after cooking. Like if you cook something and you had like grease, or whatever, collect that because that went for munitions.
Really?
Yes,
Wow.
It was huge. It was incredible. So in 1942, they ended all civilian automobile sales.
Right.
They were not
I mean,
making any cars.
They actually told all the auto manufacturers, you guys are making airplanes now,
Yeah.
right?
So essentially, you're rationing cars now. Like you couldn't buy any more new cars, and then
That's not rationing. That's like exterminating.
Well, that's the best rationing of all. Everyone gets zero.
well, then they stopped manufacturing in 1942 all metal office furniture, all radios, all phonographs, refrigerators, vacuum cleaners, washing machines, and sewing machines for civilians. The military could
So
still get stuff.
if your fridge just broke down,
Repair it.
You got to fix stuff. We got to fix stuff.
Oh, fixing.
And things might have lasted longer then.
That's inconceivable.
I know.
Fix something.
You just call up Amazon and get a new one. Replace it
they have
tomorrow.
those buttons that you push when you order something. Like they will order for you automatically. I'm sure they have ones for
Yeah,
refrigerators.
your refrigerator probably does that yearly. You know, you got to get the upgraded
Hit
model.
the button. Actually, it's just a subscription service. They just send it to you every year in your fridge.
I think of it like a box of tissues. You just pull the next one out, and another one shows up right there.
It's magic.
But then they ended up by November of 1943, typewriters were rationed, bicycles, footwear, silk, nylon, stoves, firewood, and coal.
Firewood and coal.
So it ended up being like all these major key consumer products were essentially rationed.
Right.
Yeah. And we accepted it completely.
In thinking about these limits, or you know, you started this by saying we've got to maybe one day cut back on our fuel. We know a guy named Stan Cox who really got into this topic. He wrote a book called Any Way You Slice It. And I took a look at it, and his premise was asking, is this the worst thing that could happen to us, this rationing?
Going 35.
You know, is this really,
you know, for a lot of people, be like, that is.
I mean, that is the reaction, right?
They canceled automobile racing too. Like the Indianapolis 500 was done.
Well, and I'm
NASCAR canceled?
I would have been done.
I'm super bummed that I can't get another typewriter and some silk. I mean, this is horrendous.
Yeah,
but
right.
I was going to type a novel on silk, and but we do think of it that it's like, this is horrible. I don't want to face that. No way. And yet I think his main premise is this may not be the worst way to think about what we're facing in the future. And you can still have a good life. You could still live well under some kind of rationing scheme.
Yeah, and you brought up, Jason, as like this theoretical idea, but I think you could argue it's not going to be theoretical at all. I mean, if you look at the issues that we're facing, right? Mm-hmm. We've got climate change that's really requiring us to ratchet down really dramatically our fossil fuel consumption. We talk a lot at Post Carbon Institute about the fact that fossil fuels are finite and depleting anyway, right? Mm-hmm. So in some ways, this is not a theoretical question at all. This is something that we're going to have to grapple with. You know, one way or the other, we're not going to be able to freely consume resources as much as we're currently consume, at least those of us who are privileged enough to be in a position to do
right.
that.
Right. We think, okay, if we've got enough money in the bank or whatever, we can buy whatever we want. That's the premise right now. That's the reality right now. And during a time like, it didn't matter in World War II how much money you had in the bank. You could only get so much food. You could not buy a typewriter, you know, like that's you could only go 35 miles per hour and not get a ticket.
Right.
It didn't matter how rich you were monetarily. Well, and that is shocking to think about nowadays.
And you're right. No. It's not just a matter of how much can you consume of this stuff. It's the fact that we don't even think twice about whether something is going to be available to us when we want it. We don't plan ahead. I'm guilty of this all the time. I'm just remembering, I forgot to get this, mushrooms or whatever, at the store, or blueberries.
You're talking about the kind you eat in your salad, right?
Yes, okay. That's what I was talking about.
Yeah.
Not going to the store for those other kinds of mushrooms. But, I can just, and even if I'm a good environmentalist, I get on my bike and pedal, down to the grocery store to get mushrooms. I just assume that they're going to be
be there, right?
Or toothpaste or whatever the hell it is that, toilet paper.
Yeah. If you wanted toothpaste in World War II, you had to give back an empty container of toothpaste because they didn't want to they wanted to get the tin that was in that's how it
right. Yeah. let's just say maybe it's not that theoretical.
No, I don't think it is.
And like you said, Rob, maybe it's not the worst thing that we could imagine. We could imagine a lot worse, right? But then,
well, especially if you're comparing to, again, what we talk about often at Post Carbon Institute, these crises that are raining down on us now with climate and with the depleting supplies of energy. So what comes to mind for me when you say, Asher, that, maybe this isn't theoretical, maybe this is coming, maybe we're not in World War II, so I go to, how the hell are we going to do this if we're actually going to be a cohesive society? I mean, we talked about 55 miles an hour, 35, and how much people would get all blown up. So, just practically speaking, how did it
work in World War II?
Well, they literally had the federal government, and then through these rationing boards, there were hundreds around the country. And so there were obviously regional differences in demand for energy and these kind of things. But they set quotas, essentially said the civilian economy can only consume this amount. Therefore, we can only allow this many coupons. So it wasn't really, they didn't let people hoard. If they had a lot of money, they didn't let people buy a bunch of extra food and then resell on the black market. It was like, no, if you went to a store, you would still pay money for something, but you had to also not just give them money, but say, here's my weekly coupon for this amount of cooking oil or this amount of meat or this amount of milk. So you had to have both. And then the store had to destroy that coupon, basically. And so the rationing, the boards were there to make sure that the stores understood, that this is for this amount. And they would print out new books that had different quantities, and they would add items to them, like we're rationing this now. So it was a coordination between sort of where you could go buy stuff and then these boards that would give the coupons out to essentially households. And of course, larger households got more people they had.
So hard to imagine. I'm just thinking about these stores, right?
Yeah.
Stores going along with this.
Yeah.
All the stores we have now, a lot of them that exist in this country now are large corporate owned big box type stors, right? And their entire business model is to increase sales all the time.
To sell more, right?
So if you set, you ration things and you set a maximum that could be sold, that just blows up their entire business model.
Well, it's interesting because the stores would often say, board, please start rationing this because we're starting to run low on these things and we're getting a run on our inventory and we don't like it because it starts to feel unfair and people are coming in getting upset.
So that almost seems like some people would want it, right?
Yes, they wanted it.
Because otherwise you can't get the product. Like it's sold out by the time you get to the store.
Yes. Yeah. So it was this thing where with the rationing system, there was no ability to hoard if you had extra money. And so those who either weren't as quick to get to the store right away or, got paid at different times of the month or were not as wealthy, who are living paycheck to paycheck, they at least knew that when they got their money and they got their ration book, they could go to stores and get what they needed and they would be okay. They'd survive. Like they'd have enough fuel, they'd have enough food, they'd have enough basic consumer goods that were wearing out at a reasonable rate.
Yeah. I don't want to make it seem like the good old days were perfect and now we got a whole bunch of crap. But what you were saying about say Walmart and its business model of always sell more, maybe back then the stores, it wasn't as ramped up as it is now, right? They actually maybe cared about the community.
They were locally owned and managed.
They weren't
businesses.
Publicly traded companies in most cases. These stores,
right?
Now they are. Right?
General store, grocer in the town, and they lived in that town and they cared. But the key thing though is not just the practical side, in terms of how you do this, but it's that there is a psychology behind this. So how it also worked is that everyone believed that it was fair, that there was shared sacrifice, that they were guaranteed their basic needs being met. Where it came to be really kind of hard was when things were generally scarce and life-threatening. Like penicillin was a new product at this point, and there wasn't the ramped up production of penicillin. And so they needed penicillin for the war too, like when soldiers would get hurt. So the civilian stock of penicillin was really, really low. Mm-hmm. And so it became a big deal of how do you ration drugs as well.
Mm-hmm. What'd they come up with, do you know?
It was really hard. They had to say, okay, penicillin works in these circumstances, and so we cannot let it be used outside of these limited circumstances that we had good scientific data for. And so it was interesting. They also wanted to understand better how it worked and what doses were right and what conditions. So often it was not just, do we think it's going to work, but can we learn something about its efficacy? So it was almost like an experimental drug that was life-saving in some cases.
So the psychology that you're talking about is people say they buy in because it's fair.
Yeah.
But I assume with World War II, they're also buying in because they believe in the cause, right?
Yeah. They have to have a shared purpose and a sense, of fairness at the same time, I think.
It's also, it's interesting to also think about the fact that they were rationing because there wasn't necessarily a scarcity of all of these resources in the aggregate. It was that they had to take so much of what they could get and direct it to the war effort. And I wonder how different it is for us now in the sense that, like, we're not talking about redirecting these resources for some cause. We're talking about basically rationing and reducing them so that we don't kill ourselves and other species on this planet.
Well, it's interesting because it's a cause that's even bigger than most wars, right?
Right.
Like it's the existential threat of, are we going to have a survivable future for complex life, and will civilization hold together with rule of law? And
it's a bigger deal, but it's not the same. For some reason, it's not the same psychological threat as some out-group who's got guns pointed at you.
Right.
The fairness thing keeps swimming around in my mind with rationing. It reminds me of a story when I was a kid. We'd have this Halloween party at my neighborhood. Everyone would show up, and you'd have a judging of the costumes and whatnot. And the kind of older kids in this group, they would be waiting for the party to end. As soon as the adults who were running this said, okay, party's done, go trick or treat, we would run as fast as we could up to the top of the neighborhood. It was a really big hill, and we would sprint up this thing because we knew the last house on the left, they weren't there for Halloween, but they felt bad about not being home. So they would just leave this huge bowl of candy out on the porch.
Everyone wanted to get there first?
And if you got there first, you could empty this thing.
So kids are like tackling each other, pulling each other's pants down, knocking each other down the hill.
Yeah, I mean, you're going to elbow someone in the head on the way up the hill. You're gonna whoever's dressed up as Indiana Jones has a whip is gonna grab someone. It was bad.
Yeah. Oh my gosh.
And of course, the kids who were not quite so fast but still knew about this deal. I mean, they felt like it was totally unfair.
If you're in an R2-D2 getup, you can't move very well.
Yeah,
no, it's bad, especially if you have a 35 mile per hour
speed limit.
Yeah. But then I don't know. You think about it, like the institution there is horrible, right? You just had this bowl of candy with no rule about how to distribute it. And all the other houses you go to, you have these parents who are like, okay, here's your one piece of candy, little Jimmy. And
oh, that's right.
And so I think about that, like in our society, what's going to prevent us greedy little sons of bitches from going up and trying to get our stash or our hoard?
Well, that's the point. We're not. Right now, we're actually all behaving that way, right? I mean, we are incentivizing people to get theirs. Right.
So we currently are the fast kids running for that bowl of candy.
And in some ways, you're talking about institutions are, I'm going to sound like a communist here, our free market capitalist system is like that family. It was like, we're checking out. We're going to go down the bar and get a drink. Here's a bunch of stuff. Everybody look out for themselves.
Yeah. Well, you hear about this, like, why should I have any personal virtue and curtail my consumption when it'll just free up that unconsumed stuff for the market for someone else to purchase?
Right.
And so it harms the ability for people to collectively or individually even say, no, I would like to ration myself, but what's the point? If I ration myself, some Yahoo who doesn't care or think about this is just going to have more.
Well, you were talking, Rob, about kids, and we already do all this. We actually ration in our households all the time, right?
That's true.
I mean,
I can only drink so much wine, according to my wife.
Yeah, I know.
Yeah, screen time for kids.
Okay,
Yeah. You only get a certain number of hours.
I mean,
a
maybe
week.
some parents are letting their kids have as much sugar as they want, but usually you find out what the cost is of them binging on that stuff.
Marshmallows for breakfast, pixie sticks for lunch.
They're a puddle and tears on the floor when they get their sugar crash at the end. So as parents, I think we all have had experience with rationing stuff, and it's not just a budgetary thing, like we can afford to get all that. It's more like, what are we instilling in our kids? We want them to be healthy. We also want to teach them they can't just have anything that they want in life.
Restraint is a good thing.
That's right. So we do it in our personal lives. At least we pay attention to that.
Yeah, I feel like it's a whole idea of finding a balance between meeting your needs, but being careful not to get to this level of unhealthy overconsumption. But we're not doing that in broader society right now.
No, we're not supposed to. We're supposed to consume more and increase GDP. And I mean, if we stop consuming, remember what was Bush was like after 9/11? It was go shopping. Right.
Well, if it's acceptable in the household, it seems like it could be acceptable at the community scale or at a broader scale. But you don't have a parent or two parents. The way you do in the household with the parents being able to kind of set the rules and the level of rationing, we don't have that at the community scale. It certainly doesn't exist in our capitalist style of economy right now.
No, it hasn't. It only comes up during these times of crisis right now. And that's the question is like, will we see these crises that are going to necessitate that if society wants to hold together, it has to figure this out?
We are seeing this a little bit with the debate over healthcare in this country.
Right.
So, I'm not an economist, but in a sense, you could say that we...
Neither are the economists.
That we could say that the market system prices themselves are a form of rationing, right?
Yeah.
Oh, definitely, yeah.
I mean, think about that for healthcare. And healthcare is not working. At least here we are in the United States. There are other healthcare systems that maybe people are much happier with in other places, but Americans, for the most part, are not happy with their healthcare system, right? Costs keep going up. The availability of it is becoming a bigger and bigger challenge for people, and the costs are so onerous for a lot of people that it's a leading cause of bankruptcy and all kinds of other things. And we even have this issue with medicine, right? I mean, wasn't there like a shortage of insulin, or the price of insulin got too high and there were actually deaths attributed to that?
Yeah.
So people feel like, I think a lot of Americans feel like healthcare is this crisis right now.
Right. And that, again, I think it's an amazing point that is a form of rationing. The price system is rationing. It's just not getting it to the people who can't afford or aren't able to pay, and then they're dying.
If you got insurance, fine, they'll throw anything at you. And if you fall through the cracks and don't have it, it's like, no, you don't get it.
Just because you can afford private, health care and expensive insurance doesn't mean that you should do that. We need everyone to be bought into one system so that we could provide for everybody.
Right.
And the argument there is that it's about fairness.
Yeah,
right?
and that's really a big deal for humans. And so I think that's why that's appealing. Is it does say, okay, just like kind of food is a basic right. Everyone should have enough food. Everyone should have the basic healthcare. And we can't necessarily give everyone basic healthcare if those who can really afford the most extreme forms of care kind of suck all the resources towards them.
Well, and we were talking about our kids earlier. Kids are, I think, born with a sense of fairness pretty early on. I think it's almost like an innate thing.
The first phrase out of most kids' mouths is "That's not fair."
Right.
That's right before they learn "mama."
Yeah.
And then we reply, "Too bad."
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
Go down to the store and get your ration supply of Suck It Up, right?
But I think it is a deep grained thing. So when I think about, the future of rationing, right? If we say rationing is not the worst thing in the world, there are worse things to imagine. We've done it in the past. There have been cases where societies have rationed. We are actually rationing right now. We're just using
ability to pay,
which is fundamentally unfair. Then you think about, okay, well, how could people actually get behind something like this? I think part of it is they need to understand why it's necessary, right? In World War II, we had an enemy we were sending our troops overseas. There were people that we knew, we were saving for them. At the Post Carbon Institute office, we actually have all these posters up on the wall from World War II,
Right.
which is all around like rationing, saving, conserving, recycling, all these things for the war effort. We were doing that because we had this clear enemy and we had people that we were rationing this stuff for.
Mm-hmm.
In this case, we're doing it maybe for our own preservation, for future generations. I think we need to have that strong sense of what is the purpose of doing this, and also have fairness be at the center of it.
Well, I mean, if I'm really rich, and I can say, yeah, sure, I don't care if the price goes up, I can afford it. But if the society around me completely craps out, falls apart because a lot of people are starving, and there's just like senior citizens freezing in their homes, it leads to complete political chaos. And we saw this stuff like with the Arab Spring. I remember when food prices skyrocketed, governments were getting toppled all over the place. So I see that kind of coming home in a sense. And so there are ways, though, where you say, okay, wait a second, we can't just let food and energy prices skyrocket so much that basic needs can't be met. Luxury can be curtailed. You can curtail luxury, but you cannot curtail very basic needs and have society hold together. So if we care about society holding together for our own safety and security even, or even for a sense of decency, then we should accept that in crisis times, if fuel and energy, other forms of energy, food becomes scarce, that we should figure out how to ration it again. Yeah. And I like the idea of what's called tradable energy quotas, because they don't do this thing where they put a price on carbon and these sort of things that end up making energy cost more, right? Before you price things out of affordability for people, make sure basic needs are met.
Tradable energy quota, I understand you're setting some limit of what people can spend in, say, kilowatt hours or something like that, but can you give just a little bit on how it works?
Well, I think it's similar to what I talked about in World War II, that everybody, for all these other consumer goods, you're given essentially like, here, you can use this much energy. And what form is it going to be? In kilowatts? Is it going to be in liquid fuels, et cetera, from sort of the commercial primary forms of energy? And everyone's allocated that, whether or not it's a basic floor set. And if you're frugal, though, and you can save more, then it can be traded out, so. Well,
with my economics training, I'm preconditioned to like tradability and right. A sudden market gets developed. And but so if I am getting this right, I can bike and I can lower the heat at the house. And maybe I don't use the quota that's for my household. And so then I can sell that to, say, some company or on some market.
Yeah. So it encourages frugality, right? And it also has a sense of fairness that we're all in this together, and we're all gonna try to lower our energy use year after year. If you're doing this from a climate policy, let's say, but it also would work if honestly, the fracking industry doesn't keep pumping out more and more, or there's a problem with oil supplies being imported from the Middle East for whatever reason, and we've got to go into some really emergency, hey, we can't drive 65. How are we going to handle this? And this is one mechanism. This is what is critical, I think, to understand, is that if you're frugal already, or if you know how to grow your own food already, that stuff doesn't get rationed. Right? It's this being dependent on these big commercial imported sources of major goods. Mm-hmm. So it kind of encourages, I think, developing some personal and community self-reliance and the informal economy around that. I think is a really smart way to go, and pre-adapt yourself to the future by working on those things.
Yeah, like living the simple life now, rationing comes, you're like, I don't care, I was already doing that.
Right.
Yeah, I also think that what you said about crisis is really important. It's hard to imagine, it's hard to imagine rationing anyway, but it's really hard to imagine it without a crisis really forcing that to be on the table.
Well, that's why climate change is being renamed Adolf.
All right. Every hurricane is going to be called Adolf from now on.
Well, we've declared climate crises now in how many government bodies, right?
Yeah.
Are we doing anything about it?
That's a good question. Yeah, I don't think they're rushing to pass bills, calling for rationing anytime soon.
Right.
So you talk about tradable energy quotas, and I feel like the policies to do a rationing situation are there. Like we did it in World War II. We understand fairness pretty well. Like we could put these in place, but you're not going to get them unless you have a shared sense that we need these things and that there's an impending crisis or shortage coming.
Well, good news is we have lots of crises coming. You know? I think there's going to be lots of those opportunities. I think it's incumbent upon us to even have this option on the table, because it is, I think, it's really inconceivable for people, It's so counter to everything that's marketed to us 1,000 times a day, which is buy this, buy that, do this, do that. It's all about what you get as an individual, the immediate reward.
Yeah.
I mean, if you polled people on the street, literally, if you walk down the streets of Corvallis, which is a pretty climate woke town, right, and said, hey, we got this climate crisis, what do you think we should do? How many people do you think out of 100 would say rationing?
Rationing, no. I just put up solar panels everywhere.
Yeah, get an electric car or whatever.
Yeah.
I mean, these are all individual almost consumer-based solutions, right? Yeah. So I think we have to remind people, it's what you talked about with Stan Cox, like the premise of him working on that book was, is this really the worst case scenario?
No.
Right, it is not.
And to remind people, this is not the worst.
Yeah, he kind of says like the right holds this up as like government overreach, like they're going to control us, and the left is sort of like it plays it out as like, no, we can have it all. We can have this renewable green economy and keep growing, and you're like, no, that ain't going to work. And if we don't really take this seriously, we're just going to have a dog eat dog world.
When I go back to restraint being a good thing for the most part, and why we would think that's good for us at the scale of our household, but somehow unapproachable or an awful thing for an economy. It's only because of actually from World War II on is really when we got the economy must grow and must consume more and must, that it's all based on that. It doesn't have to be that way.
No.
Yeah, and also we can remind people that we practice this all the time. We practice it in our families. I think people are starting to see now that having no limits on things is actually really unhealthy for us. We deal with that with technology with our kids. Think about things like unemployment, right? Mm-hmm. We're all, if you get a paycheck, you're paying into unemployment. The hope is you'll never have to use it, right? But it's sort of this agreement that we've created to say this is a safety net that we're providing for everybody. So I think it's incumbent on all of us, if we think that this is not only a likely issue that we're going to have to deal with, right? Which is that we're going to be dealing with constraints on resources, right? And that rationing might be a reasonable and a fair approach.
You could even say a rational approach.
Oh my God, that was so good.
I just threw it in my mouth.
Good night, Cleveland. We're
then I think it's incumbent upon us to sort of put that out, and also to think about other examples of ways that we can practice this fairness principle or collectivism in order to make sure that we're showing that it's not so bad.
Right.
If we give up a little bit of our freedom to go and buy whatever shit we want whenever we want, in order to ensure that we all have our basic needs met. Let's practice that.
Yeah, I think that's good. So I think what I'm going to do, here's what I suggest people do. We're going to get buttons that say, little buttons that say, ask me about rationing. So we can start conversations. But then I also think what people can do is realize that what's not rationed is the food you grow yourself. What's not rationed is the frugality of your life. Like if you have a well-insulated home and if you walk a lot and bike a lot, the ration board doesn't know that about you. It doesn't know that
you're going to feel that pinch a lot less.
You're going to feel that pinch a lot less if you already have a lifestyle that is a little more self-sufficient, or if you already have a community where people trade informally on these kind of things and get by without relying so much on sort of the commercial goods and services.
Yeah.
Yeah. So if like us, you're thinking that this might be the wave of the future, get out ahead of it.
Well, the best way to get out ahead of it is to drive 35 miles an hour. You'll be leading the pack at that speed.
On the freeway, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, totally. And you have a bumper sticker that says, like, ask me about rationing, so that people know why you're so slow after blaring their horn and flipping you off and passing you.
I'm just going to rear end you jerk.
Hey, to get more information or to stay updated whenever we put out a new episode, go to postkarma.org/crazytown and make sure you sign up for our email list.